everyone who is attending live. And for those who are going to be watching this later, as always, we always appreciate your support and are hoping that you appreciate the education for education's sake. So this specific topic, two things about it. Number one, when I was actually writing the article, I realized I wrote physical fitness factor, and then I went cross-eyed. So for the sake of grammar, I'm just going to call it physical fitness factor, even though the one is true, because we're talking about the fitness factors and physical fitness is a fitness factor, if so facto. The thing that's near and dear about this to my heart is I don't think anyone knows outside those internally to the company that before I got into the health space, I spent many years in the exercise space. At one time, I was a semi-pro and amateur athlete, very smart sport called competitive kickboxing. Really good for the brain and every other part of the body. But as a result of my desire to compete, I was also interested in knowing how the competitive advantage could be earned. What I mean by earned is, you can rely upon natural talent, and my, foray into sports now has to do with working with pro athletes. So I've never let go of the physical side of things, but I have to pay homage to the physical training I got from, I would say, the godfather of exercise mechanics. His name's Tom Purvis. I highly suggest you guys look him up if you're into the fitness stuff, because he will blow your mind. And his approach was about the concept of questioning everything and really mastering simple concepts so you could take these complex ideas and formulas and easily convert them into a practical execution of what are you doing with a client on the gym floor that day who has a shoulder impingement, a knee replacement, a hip problem, a spinal scoliosis. And I've really taken his approach and his framework of understanding things, and I've adapted it to how I look at health. So I wouldn't be here in terms of where I feel I am in terms of comfort, passion, and the success I'm having with people without him. And I think that it's important to understand that physical fitness and health, be it alternative medicine, allopathic medicine, are part of the same overall umbrella. But I think the difference is understanding that what we're trying to do with using physical fitness is to aid in our pursuit of health and become healthier people. And there's a really double-edged sword when it comes to what fitness can impart to people's lives. And what I want you all to think about is two things as we go through this. Number one, I want you to think about your client base, because everything that I'm going to educate on is going to be contextual to the person of whom you may be thinking about. So if it's Nana Sue, who's never been in a gym before and she's dealing with a late stage chronic disease, probably not going to make her do power cleans. And if it's a young athlete who is, at the prime of his life or her life, and they're able to deal with a ton of stress, how do you intelligently relate health and fitness to that person so you can keep them on the up and up in the world of health? So when someone asks me, or if they were to ask me, are you physically fit? And my response would say, fit for what? Because they're not necessarily the same thing. It's interesting that you can be fit and not healthy, which I'll explain. You can be healthy but not quite fit, which is probably the better camp to be in. So fitness and health are assumed to be the same thing. They're not necessarily the same thing because of what either one entails. So you can see some aspects of health will bleed into fitness, but the aspects of fitness that push the boundaries at times are always at odds with health. So looking at something like enhancing performance, well, performance is contextual. And when you competitions, we'll talk about why that can be highly problematic in the context of trying to manage the health or something of that nature. Improving your appearance, well, that can be a wonderful thing when it comes to getting yourself in a healthy range of body composition. But aesthetic athletes are the ones who are pushing the boundaries to look a certain way to potentially the detriment of their health and well-being. And the last two are, kind of part and parcel, toning up and improving flexibility. There are some aspects of fitness that integrate really well with health. And there are other aspects that ride the edge. And if you are someone who's working with a population who is fitness minded, it's important for you to understand how you can always establish a foundation in health first, then you can push your physical fitness after that. So the thing that I really want to get across is when we look at athletes, and the reason I put these 5 athletes up here is I've actually personally worked with all these people. And we look at them and we go, oh my God, they look so good. They must be so healthy. So these people represent the epitome of fitness for their intended activity. And when I say fit for what, each one needs a very unique characteristic that fits what they're required to do. There's 82 games in an NHL hockey season. There's 16 weeks in an NFL football season with one game a week. There's 162 games in a baseball season. All of those things are very, very different. And when it comes to what one requires to be at this level of fitness, it does not automatically correlate with health. Case in point, the gentleman who's shaped like a refrigerator with arms in the center. When I started working with him, he had just retired, and walking up the stairs was a challenge for him because of the tremendous amount of knee pain he was experiencing from being a human battering ram for multiple years. So everyone who is in the world of fitness will have the nuance of what it is they require to be successful in their endeavor, because to push performance and increase ability, your physiology needs to be on board with you. But there will always be the collateral damage or the associated aspects of what they may have to give up in order to succeed. And this doesn't just relate to pro athletes. Aspiring athletes, weekend warriors, anyone who has that kind of type A competitive streak in them, they must understand that there's a cause and effect of what they want to do. And if they're working with you, the health professional, if you can understand both of their worlds, because not a lot of people in health understand the nuance of sport. And conversely speaking, not a lot of people who are focused in sports really spend a lot of time understanding the wide scope of what it means to be healthy. And I think this talk bridges it really well. So the way I look at things is fitness and performance is a compartmentalized point of connection. Generally speaking, people who are physically fit need to perform at a certain level, and there is a sliding scale to the importance that's placed upon that. Fitness and health, however, can be divorced from that connection point. Because when it's about performance at all costs, if you look at pro athletes, they spend more time in rehab than car accident victims on average. So the health thing is kind of missing. If someone wants maximal capacity in a fitness in a fitness context, health will be the rate limiting factor. How I look at things and how I educate things is your performance is entirely dependent upon how well integrated your physiology is, plus your level of skill. So if someone is as strong as they can be, their conditioning capacity is at its top level, and they're as skillful as they can be, they're going to extract the maximal abilities from their body. However, that being said, the reason health is the limiting factor is if you cannot recover over time, you're going to slowly drop and drop and drop in terms of your capacity, because your body is going to be chronically trying to recover in a sub or under recovered state. So health status relates to stress tolerance capacity and the ability to perform and recover. I think this is the most important thing that's not being talked about in all circles of fitness these days, because we think it's the more time in the gym or more time on the field, the better progress we're going to make. And that's very much a conditional statement. So this is where I come back to the previous statements I've made. You can be fit, but not healthy. And I would say a lot of people in the fitness industry fall into this category. If you look at pro athletes, they're always dealing with something that's not quite right, be it a rehab thing, digestive health thing, what have you. But if you look at the gym population, a lot of people who are focusing on aesthetic goals are dealing with a lot of issues with energy levels, mood fog, chronic issues with sleep because of caffeine abuse. So pushing the boundaries of fitness takes away from the health capacity if someone's not establishing that first and foremost. There's a smaller population that you can be healthy but not fit. And I would say these people are people who have never stepped into gym their entire life, but they may be in their 70s and their 80s, and they're still gardening and they're still driving themselves everywhere. They're the physical anomalies that I think, unfortunately, due to the circumstances of our external environment, the health of the world, the way we've grown up, these people are becoming fewer and fewer. So generally speaking, to some degree, to be healthy, you need to do something that stimulates your body to improve its physical fitness. And that's what I think the last category is. The holy grail is someone who is fit and healthy. So it's taking the elements of fitness that are, within the boundaries of reasonable, and taking the aspects of health that all of us are striving to help our clients or patients achieve, and figuring out where they can live in the middle and exactly what that looks like. Because we have to understand that there is a difference between the two. And fit and healthy isn't just about the physical body. It's about the mental approach to it. It's about the emotional relationship to it. And fundamentally, it's knowing how to understand, listening to your body and knowing when it's time to push and when it's time to back off. So if we look at some of the categorical things here, someone has to work as hard, but I think they need to rest even harder. So knowing the work to rest ratio is one of the things that I talk to my clients about, because I do a lot of consulting in addition to the health stuff by designing and consulting with their various trainers or workout programs. The older you get, for example, the more you need to prioritize your rest and the more strategic you need to get with understanding what hard work means. Knowing that recovery is everything, the amount of sleep you get every night is essential, because without proper sleep, you're not going to restore endocrine balance, you're not going to restore insulin sensitivity, you're not going to get the appropriate amount of growth hormone. I mean, we covered it all in the sleep fitness factor. And then there's pairing the appropriate dietary measures, but also life outside of fitness where you don't develop what's called like an orthorexia or a neuroses, to be able to go have fun, to eat certain kinds of foods. And this goes into the health world as well. But a lot of people, especially people on the younger side of things, their unhealthy relationship to exercise is all encompassing, because oftentimes I find these people are, going back to our emotional fitness factor, maybe trying to fill a void in their lives, or they're very much attached to their identity as it relates to their capabilities in the gym or their aesthetic goals or who they relate with in that regard. So if someone's training really hard and they're not taking any off days, if they're not sleeping properly because they're taking 500 to 1,000 milligrams of caffeine a day because they're doing, 6 days in the gym, if they're calorically restricted, but they're, doubling up on their workouts and they don't take any time to chill, what message are you sending to the body? Because you'll come to find out later in this lecture, it's not about the stress and the stimulus of exercise. It's actually about the relationship between stress, recovery, adaptation, and the process repeats. So if you look at markers of fitness, you can have something that is absolutely not connected to health, like a maximal amount of strength. You don't need to be strong enough to deadlift 400 pounds to be considered healthy. You don't need to run a 60-yard time that is the equivalent of someone in the NFL, or you don't need to have a VO2 max, which is your aerobic maximal capacity that rivals a Tour de France rider. But there are some aspects of fitness markers that I think do correlate with overall health and fitness, like range of motion. The more restricted and tight you are, that usually connects to or relates with chronic systemic inflammation or aspects of hormone dysregulation, because certain hormones actually influence things like the laxity and the mobility of connective tissue. Another thing is grip strength. One of the greatest predictors for all-cause mortality is a decline in overall grip strength. So there are certain things that you can pick and choose from, but I think the magic is understanding how to take the markers on the left and correlate them to the markers on the right to understand, well, is this person healthy enough to start chasing some of these goals? We've talked about heart rate variability a ton. I think heart rate variability, true HRV with a chest strap, is the single best measure of the overall state of health of your body at any current time, because it will tell you if you're able to recruit your parasympathetic nervous system, which is where digestive health is, which is where a healthy microbiome is, which is where the body reduces inflammation, or are you on the other side, with the bear chronically chasing you, being sympathetically dominant? Looking at, just the subjective questionnaire about, how many hours a night do you sleep and what times do you go to bed? And I know everyone in this world loves to look at, what blood panel markers are important. And, a lot of athletes or people who are chronically training, they've never run an HSCRP on a blood panel, or they never look at certain aspects of things like insulin resistance, HOMA-IR, or functional lab tests that really correlate their subjective experience with what their body's telling you. And then there's looking at things like your arterial calcium score. And why that may be important is if someone wants to start doing a triathlon, but their arterial calcium score is really high, well, that might be something you want to go, hey, Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so, as your health professional, I don't think I would advise you to do this thing that's going to stress your cardiovascular system until we work on improving the overall health status of your cardiovascular system. So there are certain things that I think is a very important marker of kind of fitness that move into health: general body composition, resting heart rate, taking your client's blood pressure. This will allow you to know where that client's baseline set point is. And I do believe that, the markers on the right will always have a lasting impact on the markers on the left. And if we can move them simultaneously in parallel, I think we're really doing something for our fitness-minded people. The question is, how do we accomplish both? And this is probably one of my favorite quotes that really changed my relationship with the concept of fitness. And it's when it's about trophies and winning, it's no longer about health. And we as a people, for some reason, love to ride the extremes of life. What I mean by that is, if you think of your, most favorite moments in sports, or anything extreme, we celebrate the person who blew out their hamstring and destroyed every ligament in their knee, winning the game with a touchdown, not really thinking about what that person's life is going to be like for the rest of their days, considering they're only 30 and they need reconstructive knee surgery. And we ridicule the person who goes, you know what? I've had a good run. I haven't had any major injuries, just a few aches and pains. I'm going to retire early, even though I could play for another 3 years. We can't understand or fathom why they would do that stuff. And the reason this kind of really strikes a chord with me is a lot of the athletes I work with, I'm thinking about two things: them as an athlete in the here and now, all of which are younger than me, which is crazy to think about because by the time they're my age, they're typically retired. And I'm thinking about, well, what's going to happen into you in your 50s and your 60s? If you've had a series of head traumas, are you going to have early cognitive decline? Are you going to have predisposition to dementia, Alzheimer's? And, the unfortunate setting that you see here with this athlete is the reason I started working with him is because someone skated into his head at about 25 miles an hour, and his knee is what actually struck his face when he got tripped. So a massive concussion was the impetus of when I started working with this person. And 2.5 years later, he's never felt better. But there was a lot of work to do because not many people can go, oh my God, you've had a hit to the head. What are the downstream effects of what the body is going to experience as a result of that? You're going to have neurological inflammation. You're going to have aberrant signaling of your vagus nerve. You're likely going to be predisposed to instantaneous leaky gut, downregulation of digestive function, likely dysbiosis, chronic inflammation, potential issues that relate to detoxification pathways, lymphatic flow, so on and so forth, all because of a hit to the head. We have to remember the body is an integrated system. And if something this stressful impacts the physiology, there needs to be some understanding of what contingencies need to be put in place in order to help that athlete get their health back so they can get their performance back. And that's kind of how it all rounds itself out. So that's the introductory conceptual framework of how I look at health and fitness, the differences between the two, but also the points where they connect so we can move them both in parallel in a healthy way. Now we need to get into building our physical fitness. And this is where we're getting away from athletics and to the every person. And I hope this resonates with people on this call. If you have wanted to, engage in something physically fit for yourself, because the biggest obstacle you'll ever have to overcome is your own mind. If you can overcome that, you can overcome anything. I remember when I was a trainer, when January rolled around, we knew it was the gravy train season. We would have an influx of new people who would no longer be there by the time April rolled around. And I say it kind of tongue in cheek, haha, because it's a natural pattern of things. But short-term motivation always leads to failure, in my opinion, because it's an impulse. It's from a drive of looking at something as the way you think it should be, not necessarily having a set plan and the commitment to doing so. So if you are working with clients who really need to get their fitness on point, or if someone is, personally speaking, wanting to upgrade themselves in this way, it's about making it from a behavioral change into a habit. The same way that you eat a certain way. It's the same way you've taken out gluten. It's the same way you take your supplements on a religious basis. This has to be something that is now part of your regular life, or else it will never take. The unfortunate reality about physiology is in your 40s, it's harder to do and accomplish what you can in your 20s as quickly and effortlessly. In your 60s, the same relationship happens to your 40s. So this is the first step in the whole process, because exercise still, in my opinion, is the one panacea, if appropriately prescribed and adhered to, of something that improves every single aspect of health. And the pattern that's important to understand is it's induced stress, recover fully, super compensate, which means that your baseline starts to go one level higher so that what once was easy is actually a lot, what once was hard becomes a lot easier to you, and repeat the process. And the reason the body gets better with exercise is because the body has this inherently lazy mechanism in it. where it wants to be as efficient to do something that wastes as little energy as possible. So the stresses of exercise make the body way better at making energy for all conditions of stresses, both physically and mentally. And when the body can make energy better, we've talked about the connection to all-cause mortality being a deficiency of an energy problem. So this is the way exercise can positively impact the body. It can lower your resting pulse or heart rate. I look at the heart as having a certain number of beats engineered in it. So if your pulse is below 60 versus someone having a pulse of above 80, you're probably going to beat your heart's capacity out quite quickly, relatively speaking. Enhance your immune system's activity because it's the immune system, after all, that allows the body to recover from the rigors of exercise, because exercise induces an inflammatory response that the immune system has to attenuate to stimulate the body's ability to remodel itself. I think the third category is probably the single most important thing. You improve metabolic efficiency and metabolic flexibility via mitochondrial function and a fancy process that you can use at a dinner party called mitochondrial biogenesis, if you want to sound really smart. Because the exercise induces this need to make more energy, your genetics will change epigenetically to start to stimulate mitochondria to divide. So the number of mitochondria per cell increases dramatically in muscle cells, and it makes them better at burning both carbohydrates and fats. So rather than storing excessive energy on your body becomes this like thermic furnace. It's a machine just being alive because of its ability to burn fuel at a more efficient rate. It also improves your metabolic power and disposes glucose out of your muscles. And this is really important for people who are struggling with things like insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia. If they're able to do so, the body's ability to burn stored carbohydrates in the muscle allows for carbohydrates to be regenerated in the muscle tissue rather than being converted into, what's called fat de novo lipogenesis via going through the liver. And then other things, enhancing muscle strength. Getting weak is dangerous as you get old. It's why people need walkers or things like canes or assisted living. If you are stronger, a patch of ice in the winter, to put one in Jeff's honor up in Minnesota, isn't so dangerous because you have both the muscular strength and the nervous system capacity to deal with things like an unstable surface. Improvements in ligament and tendon integrity. It's easy to injure these tissues when the body is chronically inflamed because inflammation causes tissue degeneration. And all of the other wonderful things, which I'll briefly touch on, but not go into detail. Improving how your heart can beat in terms of a single pump, improving the body's ability to release nitric oxide and improve the diameter of blood vessels, can actually make new neural connections via exercise-derived BDNF, which is something that helps the brain improve its health state as a result of having to learn new exercises. So what we're really doing is we're rewiring the body, and the physiological downstream responses and updates, if you will, are much more integrated and powerful than they were pre-exercise. So what that looks like is categorically picking how we represent the different physiologic areas through the kinds of exercise we want to focus on. Do we want to do something that's focusing on muscle contraction and strength? That's hypertrophy and increasing muscle mass and muscle power? Or do we want to do something that's more nervous system speed and power related, which is the number one characteristic we lose as we get older? It's why when someone once was a track athlete in their high school days and at the age of 50, they go to try to run a 100-meter and they blow out a hamstring. It's their nervous system and their power production can't do what it once did because they're so detrained. I think the third aspect, cardiovascular output and endurance, is really important because this is the area that improves your body's ability to utilize oxygen to make energy and dispose of carbon dioxide and other waste materials. And then balance, coordination, and skill work. This is important when you've picked a certain kind of activity. If you're a rock climber, there's really nothing that's going to replicate the skill of rock climbing like doing the exercise, but improving your strength will make you a better rock climber kind of in a general context. So these are the areas which I coach people in understanding the different aspects of exercise and the requirements, and then you distribute the activities via a practical application. How do you design resistance training workouts? Where do you do some strength stuff? Where do you do some power stuff? How do you relate to your cardio zones? How do you do the zone 1 stuff, which is like going for a simple walk? And how do you do the high intensity training, which I think has a place if you've ever tried to run through an airport because they've announced your name on the PA and the doors are closing for your flight and you got a suitcase in your hand. And the skill-based activity is really about understanding what is it that you gravitate towards, because I hate to say it, if it's not fun, you're probably not going to stick to it. So using that as one of your guiding lights in the choosing process is really important. And I do think there are optimal styles. And what I mean by that is there are areas to focus on that are going to give you the greatest return or bang for your buck in a general context. Heavy resistance work metabolically is going to help you become way more powerful, increase muscle mass, increase metabolic rate, because the more muscle you have on your body, the more calories you burn simply by being alive. And increasing, muscle contractile force is also part and parcel with increasing blood flow to those muscles. It means you deliver vitamins, minerals, amino acids, carbohydrates to the muscle tissue that's working, and you also remove those waste materials via the matrix exchange where the cardiovascular and the lymphatic system is. So it's a really good thing to make sure that fluid dynamics in your body is working really well to localize areas of muscle. The zone 2 cardio, I think, is something that everyone should be doing in some capacity. If you want to learn more about zone 2, there's a gentleman by the name of Dr. Peter Attia. He's got a great podcast called The Drive, and he interviews pretty much the biggest nerd experts, and I say that in a positive context, people who will talk about zone 2 metabolic adaptations for 2 straight hours. But what's great about zone 2 cardio is you're working at this very specific percentage, call it 65, 70% of your maximum heart rate, and you're doing it for an extended period of time. So you're stimulating your body's metabolic capacity to increase in a sustained manner. And what that does is it supercharges mitochondrial function and makes you a much more efficient fat burner and makes your heart work more efficiently. So that not only does the muscle of the heart get stronger, but it can pump more blood per stroke. And that's always going to be good in terms of circulation. And there's that zone 5 stuff. And zone 5 is the stuff we love to hate. If you've ever done like a 30-second all-out sprint on a treadmill, if you're ready for such a thing, these are one of the things that helps keep the body physically young, because you're doing power stuff, you're doing high range of motion and maximal energy production. So if you construct these 3 things into a workout program that's very general in nature, these I think are the best tools for slowing the aging process, because the body maintains its youthful abilities even into your 5th and 6th decade of life. When it comes to understanding how to coach someone in the beginning of deciding an exercise process, this is how I would put things together personally. So I would say decide first and foremost if you're more interested in being discipline focused in a specific sport. Do you want to be a surfer, a distance cyclist, play basketball, or do you want to be more well-rounded and just want to exercise? Because whatever you are interested in, as I mentioned before, that's what's going to give you the staying power and give you the desire to invest the time and the energy in what you're doing. The second thing is analyzing the characteristics of what you need to succeed, that rhymes nicely, in your endeavor. So do your activities require that you become stronger or more powerful, or do you need a greater aerobic capacity or mobility? So someone who's a distance runner, they're pretty much an aerobic sport. Their goals are to be able to maintain a high rate of speed consistently. But the limiting factor in some cases for distance runners becomes their strength and power when something like a hill comes into the equation with a marathon. Or if someone is playing more of an athletic endeavor that has a high amount of speed power, like they're playing hockey in the evenings, you're on the ice for about 45 seconds, it's all out, but you're on the bench for about a minute and a half and recovering. But if your endurance is compromised and your body isn't healthy enough, your ability to recover after each shift is very much going to be diminishing as time goes on. So you have to figure out what your characteristics are. And then you have to ask the simple question: is my health up to the task? You may have the best intentions and the best plans laid, but if you don't have the health to be able to deal with your stresses, well, then you need to focus on the health side of things, which is where you all come in, so you can get this person ready. And then the third thing is making this something that's part of a balanced life, so it doesn't interrupt the well-being that is your day-to-day. How much time does your activity take up? How are you going to implement it in your life? And how are you going to use your knowledge of exercise and your knowledge of health to merge when it comes to the concept of sports science and exercise nutrition? What tools can you use? How are you going to track your progress? How are you going to ensure that your health isn't starting to slip as a result of you wanting to potentially push the pace or elevate your status within the exercise endeavor that you're choosing? So it really does start with a perspective. You don't want to be rigid. If you're not ready for something, if you have been deconditioned for a decade plus, you need to kind of grease the wheel again. You know, whatever cliche metaphor works here is you need to be able to work with where you are so you can not go out there for a very short period of time and then eventually get to where you want to go. I've had my own experiences with being humble because what I could do in my, late teen years and early 20s was very different than what I could do now. I could train 5, 6 days a week. 4 of those days would be 2 a days, and I would be just fine. If I tried that now, I would probably be down for a solid week after a couple of weeks of doing so. So you have to understand the perspective of doing this has to start from a healthy perspective, the healthy mindset to induce the ability for a healthy body to come from it. So these are the questions that I ask. Who are we considering here? And who is contextual to what's their past? What are they wanting to do? What have they done before? And, are they actually ready? And you can answer that by figuring out what is the amount of activity someone's accustomed to. If they've been a recreational athlete all their lives, they've never lost a step to some degree. But if they've been a recreational athlete, or they haven't been a recreational athlete over the last 20 years and they're getting back into it, that's going to be a different thing because that's going to allow you to understand when the last time they performed at a high level was. And then you have to understand what their current health status is and what is their allostatic load. Because the process of exercise is going from homeostasis, which is your body's natural way of maintaining everything as it is, into a condition of allostasis by pushing the boundaries just outside the context of accustomed norms and then allowing the body to get back into a state of homeostasis where it's elevated its baseline. And what is their specific goal? That's the whole thing. So the allostatic load is really what exercise is all about. It's understanding how to repeat things, how to modify things when there's a lack of adaptation, when there's a prolonged response that's healthy, how to measure it, and when there's an inadequate response, how to stop things in their tracks to focus on moving from a fitness perspective back to a health perspective. And it's really the in-between because what affects the physical is going to affect the mental, and you're going to see a lot of things and characteristics in an overtrained athlete or an overtrained individual that will be signs of their health being negatively impacted. So the physical characteristics of fitness are where I would start. What are the things that we all can physically improve, that should have the ability to physically improve, and consider these based upon the initial assessment of your client and the intention of what it is they want to do. So the way someone is ready for a health journey, and here's an example. If you give a new client and they're very fragile, they're a canary in the coal mine, you're not going to start a deep heavy metal detox day one. You're going to work at building up their physical capacity. You're going to improve their overall health and vitality. You're hopefully going to restore digestive function, balance out the nervous system, and open the channels of detoxification before you start something like a heavy metal detox, which is a highly stressful thing for a client. Exercise must be the same thing. Start with the area of greatest ability and the greatest stability, and then push the person in the same way. And I think these concepts allow us to understand that health and fitness really should be looked at in the same way. And then when it comes to the specific characteristics of health that are limiting them, how can you determine these factors as it relates to their allostatic load? If someone has very poor metabolic power and metabolic flexibility, they have to start very gently. If someone isn't digesting their food, well, could that impact their recovery? Of course it could, because if you're not going to digest your proteins, you're going to have a harder time pulling amino acids into your system. You're not going to be absorbing minerals and vitamins as efficiently, so you're not going to have the cofactors to sustain these biochemical reactions. And you're potentially going to be nutritionally and calorically deficient just because things are running through you. So all of these aspects, hydration status is very much tied to mineral status, micronutrient status and detoxification pathways are very critical for recovery and the body being able to recover from these specific stresses that we're placing upon it. And then there's the mental emotional aspects. If someone has OCD or they have some kind of neuroses around things like this, you're going to have to manage that so their sympathetic nervous system isn't going to be depleting them all the time. and is going to be activating catabolic processes. So this is how I consider the overall allostatic load of the client, because if the body isn't where I want it to be, we need to start there. And if you go back to the previous slide, I will pick the kind of exercise, or I relate to the person through whoever they're training with, to help that trainer or the person who's in charge of their processes understand where their capacity might be, and maybe how to start spotting some signs or early detections of where they're going over the edge. And the same principle is what Dr. Eric and Kelly use in the book, The Thyroid Debacle, where cellular hypothyroidism is really someone in chronic allostasis. So that would hold true to someone who's chronically overtrained, because their ability to get back to homeostasis is not happening because of the fact that they're chronically pushing themselves. And we have to understand that exercise is a stress. That's why it works. But if it's something that's beyond our capacities, we have really well-defined categories or aspects of stress responses in the body. They're going to start to show themselves in order for us to have an early understanding of what we have to do to right the ship. So when someone's chronically stressed, the HPA axis is going to be activated. They're going to release a lot of stress hormones. Sympathetic dominance is going to prevail, which shuts down vagal tone and digestive function. The adrenal glands are going to be pumping overtime. Blood pressure is going to go up. Blood vessels are going to dilate, and the blood sugar is going to be chronically high. And if someone continues to push through this, they are going to experience burnout. So this is where that line, I think, really has to be walked and well understood as a health professional who is starting to understand the rigors and the details of exercise. So if we all can be like this gentleman who's in his prime at this age, we likely don't have any worries. But we have to understand fundamentally what this looks like practically, because, you know, the best theory in the world, not practically applied, isn't very useful when the person's in front of you, just like in clinical practice. So the first thing that I want to communicate is there is no perfect way to accomplish this. A lot of people and clients like the black and white of tell me what's good, tell me what's bad, tell me what to do, tell me what not to do. Life is shades of gray. So it's understanding the permutations of what works with the individual, because I believe working with the person is the most important aspect of the overall outcome success. So what I have developed here are two different approaches for learning how to combine different exercise methods that may relate to the kind of person that is in front of you and how they like things. So option one could be someone who's more left brain and logical. They want different days that have different focuses of stimuli, and you have a resistance workout day or two, you have a cardio day, you have a mobility day, you do your speed and power stuff one day, and you have your high intensity intervals. If planned appropriately, this can be a really cool workout because there's a chronically dynamic variation day by day, week by week, and over the course of time, the body is going to advance in all of these disciplines in a very regimented way. Option two is more for the right brain people. This is what I personally like, because I don't like something being too rigidly defined. So you can do a combination of what's called the conjugate method, and you can combine things for efficiency. So you can do more in a workout, but have less time in the gym per week. So you can do a speed and power day followed by your high intensity training at the end of a workout. You can do some, time under tension resistance work and then add some zone 2 cardio at the end. And then you can do your mobility work prior to your maximal strength, so your body and your nervous system are primed. And what's cool about this is you get a lot of stimuli within the workout itself, and the body never has the ability to chronically respond to the same stress over and over. So I think it's harder to hit a plateau. So these are two different approaches or ways of looking at it. And I think the most important thing to remember is it's got to be appropriate for the client, where they are, and obviously what they enjoy, because if they're not going to enjoy it, they're not going to stick to it. So the considerations for the creation of a program are really looking at the chosen combination of activities, the weekly commitment and schedule distribution, because if you have 3 days to get this done with a client, you have to figure out how to make really good use of that limited amount of time. And then there are your phases of training. How are you going to undulate the intensity increases and the deloads to make sure that your client is always overreaching, but never to the point where it's burnout? How are you going to plan your rest and recovery? People don't think about these things. They plan the workout, and rest is just kind of like whatever, but rest could be utilizing massage therapy or osteopathy. It could be doing saunas or cold plunges. It could be doing things that allow your body to get into a very parasympathetic state, so the next workout you're more prepared. And then the last two things I think are absolutely essential considerations, because there's nutritional alignment for health, then there's nutritional alignment for performance. There's supplemental support for general health, and there's supplemental support for performance. And I think these two things have to be understood individually so they can be integrated systemically. So here's an example of a general workout for no one specifically that gives you all the parameters of what I would call a full body, total body workout that will improve strength, hit every major muscle group and every major motion in the body, and give you a specific kind of stimuli that's going to lend well to stimulating muscle growth and what I call metabolic power or anaerobic time under tension. And it's basically something very simple where you can have a client go into the gym, or for yourself, you can design a workout such as this, go through your specific parameters and get out. This can get done in an hour or less. And then on an alternate day, rather than a strength day, you can look at what's called a cardio day, where you do a full body mobility routine, because mobility is very important as you age. And then that also primes the nervous system, increases core body temperature, and gets the cardiovascular system ready for what's called a zone 2 workout, where you take your target heart rate, make that an actual heart rate. You can use all kinds of technology like the polar heart rate strap with an app that connects to your phone or a watch. And then you can track all these workouts to make sure that your progress is steadily increasing, because when you're doing something that's designed to stimulate aerobic efficiency and metabolic flexibility, two things should happen. Number one, every duration that is the same as the previous one should be able to be approached at slightly greater intensities speed wise without your target heart rate or your actual heart rate going up too much. And that lets you know that your body's getting more metabolically flexible and your ability to burn fat for energy at a higher intensity of exercise is improving. And when it comes to what's going on, we have to understand that the body is going to take these aspects and characteristics and it's going to show up in different areas of improvement. So what you're going to see with resistance and power work is you're going to see an improvement in how your nervous system operates. The contractibility of muscles is going to get better. But things like testosterone, growth hormone, estrogen, insulin sensitivity, all of these things are going to improve as a result of the adaptations to the exercise. You're going to see that local muscular fatigue, hard to say, and metabolic waste accumulation is going to intensify, and the body's going to get better at flushing the system. You're going to see short, intense cardiovascular stress when you're doing resistance and power work, and that makes your heart way more powerful in terms of its contractibility. And for people in their elderly years, decreased bone density and connective tissue catabolism is a really honest aspect about living. So resistance training is really good for this. When it comes to aerobic exercise, you're going to see the stresses of free radical formation. You're going to have higher cardiac output. You're going to ask more of your respiratory system, the gas exchange within your lungs. And you have to understand that people who log a lot of miles on the bike or a lot of miles on the road, there's going to be a lot of repetitive use at low levels of intensity, which is why people get things like shin splints and stress fractures. So knowing the stresses of exercise and how they impact the physiology is really important. Nutritional strategies, well, we've talked about nutritional fitness, but I think the baseline that you should understand with this approach is you have to understand that that person may need a very specific way of eating for health. They may have food sensitivities, conditions that make certain foods a no-no, and then the exercise goals are more about how to use food as fuel, knowing when to increase carbohydrates, when to reduce carbohydrates and increase fats. And the old saying for someone who wants to improve their body composition, abs are built in the kitchen, is kind of a half truth, because you can't just eat well and expect your abs to reveal themselves. Intelligent training and strategic dietary approaches will allow you to remember that your abs are there. So if your diet looks like something in this picture and then you selectively categorize it on the days that you train to suit the conditions of the exercise, that's going to be your ultimate goal. And when it comes to supplements, the world of sports nutrition is not the same as the world of health when it comes to supplementation. A lot of sports supplements are filled with things that are unfortunately very bad for you. And sometimes they try to cheat the system with using, banned substances and various compounds in their supplements that may give you a competitive edge. But if you're working with a young athlete who gets routinely tested, you need to be very careful with those considerations. So how I relate to sports supplementation and general supplementation is this categorical approach. Category one is it aligns with health. So if it's something to improve your digestion, something to relax your nervous system, something to restore nutritional deficiencies, regardless of if you're an athlete or not, category one should be there for almost every person. Category two, what aids performance? And this really comes from knowledge of, metabolic function and how the body makes energy. So things that you can use prior to exercise to either improve your overall strength and power output or improve your exercise duration and your resistance to fatigue. Category three is what promotes recovery, because as I mentioned before, recovery really is the most important thing. So how do you stimulate the growth of new muscle tissue? How do you stimulate the body to be able to downregulate inflammation when it's appropriate to do so? And the context of when and how to use these supplements is really the magic. Knowing these things strategically can really overhaul a client's approach and give them that little bit extra that supplementation can provide in terms of performance and ultimately recovery. And that really does dovetail us nicely into this month's product feature, because I'm really excited to mention something. I don't know if any of you knew this, but master supplements and US enzymes have just become a little bit bigger of a deal, because we've thrown our hats into the foray of being involved in sports performance by going through the Informed Sport certification from LGC. So we thought, how can we do something that's a little bit different? Because if you look at the world of sports nutrition, and there are a couple companies that connect to some brands, like Douglas Labs has Clean Athlete, Thorne has a line of sports supplements, but their focus is still on the performance side and very little on how the health aspect connects to performance. And I'm really excited about kind of owning this conversation in a way that no one ever has, because you would not believe the stresses that athletes deal with. And I would probably extend that out to people who are heavily involved in exercise, that they just take as kind of normal. Very few people think digestive issues in the world of pro sports is a problem. They probably think it's funny they're on the plane and they fart and the whole plane's suffering. But what Jeff and I did was sit down and look at the three products that we could start with as kind of a package deal. And what we came up with was Digestzyme Plus, Theralac Pro, and Therazyme. And the way I'm pitching these is digestive support, microbiome modulation, and inflammatory response. The reason I've chosen these three is because when you stress the body, we talked about the cascade of effects that happens under physiological rules of stress. Generally speaking, athletes have to eat more than the average person, and their digestive systems don't work quite as well. They have the rigors of training, they have the stresses of travel, they have the stresses of the event, and whatever their body has to experience typically goes against strong digestive function. That's step one. The second thing is, if all those things are present, the downregulation of digestive health typically leads to the loss of health within the microbiome itself, because the profile of bacteria, the overgrowth of yeast and fungus, the potential issues of eating food that's been prepared ahead of time, these things can be an assault on the microbiome, not to mention that leaky gut and stresses of exercise predisposing athletes to leaky gut will cause not only local issues in the gut, but systemic inflammatory issues in the rest of the body. So using a digestive enzyme plus a probiotic to anchor those two will be paired with the third product of Therazyme being what I call a non-specific broad spectrum immune system support, because all of the major body systems that have the ability to be circulated to via the circulatory systems of the cardiovascular and the lymphatic system mean that the contents of what inflammatory compounds may be existing in the gut can get systemically circulating via leaky gut and cause all kinds of issues systemically that will take away from the athlete's ability to recover. So these three things, which I don't believe exist currently in the world of sport, is kind of our foray into this area to hopefully bring some more awareness to sports and athletics. So if any of you are working with athletes currently or aspire to, I really want to put this message out there that help young athletes understand that if they take care of their health and they develop good habits at a young age, they potentially maximize the time frame that they can compete at a high level for, which at the pro ranks might mean, a few more years at a few $1 million a year, and that never hurts. But also when you retire, you have so much of your life ahead of you that you can do things with your health. And I won't go into this just for the sake of time, but everyone's going to be getting the slides. We'll be doing something specifically on the approach of using the master supplements performance protocol in the context of sport, but this is the framework and the understanding and the rationale as why I've chosen the three products and how we're going to present them and promote them within the world of sports. But it also does allow us to kind of dovetail into the new product launch. And Jeff can let you know exactly further details in isoquercetin after the call. But here's a product that can kind of be a category 1 and a category 2, because we know that quercetin is a systemically beneficial antioxidant. It's got great research surrounding cardiovascular function, its antioxidant capacity for modulating inflammation. But there is an amazing amount of research that supports the use of quercetin as an exercise performance aid, but also the ability to help enhance recovery. And I actually found a really cool study that looked at short term, and by short term, this was a 7-day study on looking at how quercetin supplementation improved ultimate cycling capacity and regenerated the body's ability to be insulin sensitive post exercise. And I read through this and I went, wow, that's incredible. And I wanted to understand how this mechanism worked. And one thing they said was quercetin seemed to help attenuate the post-inflammatory response of minimizing insulin sensitivity. So when the body's inflamed, metabolic capacity goes down. It's a very closely tied relationship. And post-exercise, to some degree, there is a very strong inflammatory response. And the effects of what quercetin seemed to do in the parameters of the study is an improved insulin sensitivity, which led to faster recovery times and a subsequent improved performance on repeat cycling, time to exhaustion with cycling exercise. So this study alone shows the potential benefits of using quercetin not only as a daily supplement, but in the context of performance, it can be a really beneficial thing to stack with some of the other products that we have. And then the last thing I want to go back to is Proteinzyme, because I believe that the area of protein supplementation in the world of sports is probably one of, I don't want to be cruel, but it's a horrible, it's horrible. Long and short, if you turn over some labels of protein powders and you look at all the artificial sweeteners, the lack of nutrition, the questionable source of where they get their powders from, like it's no wonder they can sell you 2.2 pounds for $35. And it doesn't mean that whey protein is bad. It's just contextually, it's not giving you a lot. Whereas something like Proteinzyme, which can be mixed with a multitude of other things, it's a highly nutritious protein support. So it's not just straight macronutrient protein support. You get the benefits of micronutrients, antioxidants, specific fibers, probiotics, and there's a growing trend of plant-based athletes who are trying to get away from whey protein and casein because they know of the allergenicity potential. They know that in some cases they have negative responses to it. And with something like Proteinzyme, it gives people something that's an alternative that is not only really beneficial to you, but it's highly convenient because it's sometimes really hard as an athlete to get access to high quality food all the time. So if you have these kinds of meal replacement supplements that have organic ingredients with high mineral content and high vitamin and antioxidant capacity, this is something that you can use pre or post workout in conjunction with some other supplements as part of your routine and regime. So with that, everyone, I do believe that I have to jump in and finish my set. Whoever wants to go next, just make sure you do at least 12 reps, and I will stop everything there. Thank you very much.